Okay, so welcome to another podcast on Model Technology. Today we're fortunate enough to be joined by BOYDSense, an innovative technology from Germany. I'd like to introduce you to Ben and Jochen. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see you both again. Thank you very much for joining us both. I suppose some introductions are appropriate. Ben, would you like to start telling everybody a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today, please?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for giving us the opportunity to introduce ourselves, Stephen, and BOYDSense, which stands for Biology on Your Device. And my name is Ben Delhay. I'm the CEO of BOYDSense. And before BOYDSense, I worked 20 years in big corporates for companies like Sanofi, J&J, and Bayer, primarily in the diabetes space, but not only. And I studied economics many years back. So I'm very much a commercial business guy, and I joined BOYDSense as a CEO roughly 3.5 years ago.
Okay, and Jochen, can you tell me something about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jochen Sieber. I'm a physician, a trained diabetologist, but since a long time also in industry. I was with all of the, or most of the big relevant insulin players like Sanofi, Novo Nordisk. I've been working some time for Becton Dickinson and the spin-off of Becton Dickinson. In between, I once changed indication, working in allergic asthma and allergic rhinitis, but my whole life, so to say, is diabetology and here medical and clinical affairs. And Ben and I, we know each other very well. And he approached me on a congress one day, hey, I need help from a medical. And so I said, yeah, why not? And this is why I'm now with BOYDSense officially starting next month.
Okay, perfect. All right, wonderful. Can you start telling me a little bit about BOYDSense, please?
Yes, so at BOYDSense, we are making health monitoring very simple, powered by breath. And we risk stratify, screen, and detect different chronic conditions and diseases, initially starting with diabetes. So you might have heard that dogs like Lassie from the TV series have very powerful noses, and they can detect many different diseases. For example, epileptic cases, glucose, or even cancer. And what we do at BOYDSense is we put the power of a dog's nose into people's hand to give them access for fast, pain-free health monitoring solution, initially starting with diabetes or the glucose monitoring. We clearly overcome the challenges of blood glucose monitoring. There are more than 600 million people worldwide suffering from diabetes. And they are measuring one key metric, which is the glucose level. And this can be done with two different solutions today. Either somebody uses a blood glucose meter, where you have to prick your finger with a lancing device and get a blood drop, which you then use to get your glucose reading. Or people are wearing a sensor in the arm, which is for the continuous glucose monitoring. And both technologies are invasive, stigmatizing, and there's limited accessibility, especially when it comes to the continuous glucose monitoring, as this technology is quite expensive if you compare against a blood glucose meter. If people with diabetes are not measuring glucose on a regular basis, that might lead to severe chronic complications like depression, blindness, or amputation. So it is a key metric and very important to measure it on a regular basis. If you compare our device against the existing solution, it's totally pain-free. You just have to blow into our device. It's very simple, very easy to use, and very cost-effective. And we are not measuring blood at BOYDSense. We are measuring what is called volatile organic compounds, small molecules that pass from the blood through the lung. In the room here, we have a few thousand different volatile organic compounds, but we are only interested in very specific ones, which we have identified in the first clinical trial, which Jochen will explain a bit deeper to you. And we focus on the ones that we have identified in this clinical trial. I give you two examples of VOCs that we are measuring and which we have identified with a gas chromatograph. One is aldehyde, another one is ketones. But it's important to understand that we measure really a double-digit number at the same time. And we believe that is needed to get accurate and precise results for people living with diabetes.
So to add on what Ben just was saying, these VOCs, they come as a kind of pattern, let's phrase it that way. And you have to develop an algorithm which really is, so to say, calculating a glucose value out of that pattern. And because this is a brand new technology, I mean, the theory is already existing some years, but to measure glucose and to measure it in a way that the patient can have direct conclusion out of what he gets as information, how to alter his treatment or change doses or whatever, to figure this out, of course, you have to find this pattern and correlate it to the respective glucose value. We have done a study, the first study, so to say, where simply it was really what Ben just mentioned, what I just mentioned was done, meaning VOCs were identified. Patterns of these were related to glucose, so to figure out that there is some relationship, correlation between the VOCs and the glucose. And in the second study, then this knowledge was used to evaluate, is there really a kind of good enough or good performance of the device. There are typical studies in the development of devices measuring glucose, and there are different measures which are used to show the quality of the thing. And there is something which is called consensus error grid. And this means that the value of the device, which is under test, in that case, our VOC analyzer, is compared to a standard lab procedure. And there is only a certain deviation allowed between the value of the device under development and the reference value. And a long time ago, there was a quite smart development. Scientists said, okay, if there is a little difference between the device value and the reference value, it may be of no importance, no relevance. If it is more, it may become more and more important. And if it is quite a way what the device is measuring from what the reference value is thinking, it may even be dangerous if the patient sees a glucose value which is far away from his real value, and he may over or underdose his treatment. So this consensus error grid was developed, and there are different zones from A to E, meaning that there are different risks of making the wrong treatment decision. And what is the kind of consensus is that if you have 99% or more of the values in two zones, A and B, this means that the device is measuring glucose safely enough so that the patient can rely on what he is seeing. And this has been done in the second study. This was a good start, and it is also published. But of course, now we need to know much more things. For example, what you can imagine or may be able to imagine, we are measuring glucose. And what if a patient is eating something, which everybody does? What if this interferes with the VOC pattern, and the value would not show the real value simply because there is some, let's say, disturbance by the impact of eating something? So that is what has to be evaluated in a clinical study. We have to figure out also how to fine-tune our algorithm. So we are only collecting data pairs, meaning a VOC value and corresponding glucose value measured by a lab reference, to have data pairs, VOC value this is glucose value that, and there will be more than 10,000 data pairs to really improve the algorithm, to fine-tune it so that finally there is a clear picture on how the device then should calculate what is measuring as VOC and giving then as glucose value. Of course, that is not everything which we will do. There have to be additional studies because sooner or later, of course, our device, if used or when used by patients, it has to prove that it is efficient and safe. So we have to continue clinical development, have to do additional clinical studies. And mid-end of this year and the continuous years, there are additional studies which will be done. It is not, for example, not only a meal which may impact the glucose value. There may also be other interfering substances. Quite interesting, for example, what we have seen in healthy subjects, that alcohol has some impact here. And so we have to figure out how big is this impact, can one handle it? And then, of course, the final so-called pivotal study will be done, meaning then we will do a study fulfilling all requirements from regulatory authorities, regulatory bodies, so that finally then they will say, okay, you have proven safety and efficacy of your device. So herewith it's approved to be sold and to be given to patients.
So we have a roadmap in place towards VOC-led diabetes care as a starting point, as an initial starting point for BOYDSense. So we like to start with a very simple de-risk product, which we call ranges for the time being, which is for healthy population, for people with prediabetes and a low-risk type 2 population. Then the plan is to launch a second product soon later, which is for exactly the same target population, but also for people who are injecting insulin. And we are focusing very much on type 2 diabetes here today. The idea is really to build first a diabetes platform which goes beyond the glucose monitoring with ketone testing, with risk stratification for fatty liver disease. And we envision really to build an entire platform that goes beyond diabetes, even in other indications such as asthma as one indication. Or we could imagine also to build more an emergency care, point of care testing platform to risk stratify, for example, sepsis. So there's plenty of opportunity via the volatile organic compounds to risk stratify, detect, and monitor different diseases which are going beyond, and that's where we see our future.
So I think for me, thinking about pre-diabetes is an interesting subject. If BOYDSense can detect metabolic changes early through breath, what are the implications? Could this shift how we screen or monitor or even prevent diabetes?
Yeah, absolutely, I would say, because what really is an issue today is that, first of all, the stage pre-diabetes is not yet very well defined. There are some glucose values, and if they are, so to say, in between normal range and real diabetic range, then it's considered pre-diabetes. What we now know from a medical point of view, what we now know more and more is that identification of this pre-diabetic stage is extremely important, because the longer the toxic impact of glucose on the body, Ben mentioned already late complications, the longer this takes and the more glucose is there, the higher the risk to develop such kind of late complications. And so if you could detect early enough that something is going on, then you could interfere with, one has really to say, quite simple solutions. So what probably many of the people know is that lifestyle change is something which is very important, meaning physical exercise, meaning healthy food. By the way, it is not diabetes diet anymore. Many people still believe that it's a diet and it's a special thing and it's complex and it does not taste well and all that stuff. But only healthy diet may already reduce the risk to really develop type 2 diabetes at a later stage. And with that, of course, we can easily figure out that the huge amount of money which has to be spent to treat late complications of patients with diabetes may be reduced quite a lot. Again, Ben did already mention it, but to shed some more light on this, the type 2 patients, they have a high risk of myocardial infarction, of cardiovascular disease, of renal disease, of nerval disease, neuropathy, of blindness. And all of these diseases you can already calculate, so to say, in your mind. They are extremely costly if, first of all, detected lately, and second, caused simply by the fact that the patient is already in a status of high glucose without knowing it. To keep the long story short, for sure, if there would be a quick and accurate kind of pre-diagnosis of this status of this disease, that would be of big help for the healthcare system.
Okay, so could BOYDSense also be seen as a way to measure the benefits of behavior changes like diet, exercise, or perhaps even sleep? Do you see a role for this kind of breath-based monitoring in digital therapeutics or behavioral intervention where objective feedback can actually boost adherence and motivation?
So if we can prove that in clinical studies, I would say it could be a possibility. Coming from my clinician's perspective, having working in a hospital for some years before I joined industry, this is one of the most important things to really give a direct feedback to the patient. The typical situation today is patient comes once every 3 months or 6 months, depending in which country or region he is living, or even more rarely, to the doctor. There may be measurement of something called A1C. Then the doctor will tell him, hey, do this, do that, and the patient is alone again. And what many people really forget is diabetes is a 24/7 disease. You have to continuously take care of it. And of course, you have to have continuously feedback. And if a patient starts improving his physical activity, changing his diet, of course, if there could be by, let's see, a feedback showing him, hey, you are getting better, glucose goes down. Or if we identify other parameters which may show a risk for development of late complications, I would say that would really be helpful for the daily management of every person with diabetes.
The idea of our devices, we will have the hardware as one component, which is more kind of breath collector, where somebody needs to blow into the device and will get some very basic information from the hardware, from the device itself. But there will be an application next to it where we will provide further information. And we are also developing this application as we speak, together with patients, together with healthcare professionals, with our medical advisors, and that will go beyond the typical measuring, and we are defining that as we speak. We will have connectivity as well in our device, so we will share the data with other digital healthcare platforms. And the idea is to integrate our device also to these digital healthcare platforms.
I guess with the feedback mechanism that we were discussing, it's a tool to detect opportunity to optimize insulin therapy. Or is the strength of the system more in managing diet-based early-stage diabetes? I imagine it's perhaps both. In other words, where does it sit in the spectrum from prevention to full pharmacological adjustment?
From a medical perspective, I have to say to really optimize, or it depends which kind of insulin treatment a patient is following. If you have a patient with treatment which is called multiple daily injection, meaning the patient is injecting basal insulin to cover his basal insulin needs and injecting bolus insulin to cover his meals, then I would say at the moment CGM in theory is the gold standard. In theory, because what Ben already said, it is not everywhere accessible, and if you have only, so to say, the opportunity to measure, for example, before the meals with today with a finger prick, if that could be exchanged to the VOC measurement, that of course would help much more also to get patients more involved. And because it's pain-free, it's more simple maybe that the patient really will start now measuring in the frequency which is usually recommended by a doctor to the respective person, because what I just said in MDI, 4 to 6 measurements per day, if you look how frequently patients are really measuring, it's far beyond that, and that is an issue. And for other treatments, I would say it would even be more easier to give this kind of feedback because, for example, imagine you have a patient, type 2, a person with type 2 diabetes, who is on certain oral drugs, metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors, whatever. The payers at the moment are reluctant to, for example, reimburse blood glucose measurement or CGM or something like that. If there is something which is reliable and doing a good performance, again, the patient can afford it or his insurance, whatever, because it is not so stigmatizing as finger pricking is. He may do it more frequent, so that also from that perspective, the time how long a patient stays on a certain combination of oral drugs may be prolonged. And so all in all, I would say this feedback is something which really could provide a lot of help. One additional comment here, if you look into clinical studies measuring efficacy of all the treatments we have today, we have great drugs. We have great insulins, we have great oral drugs, we have great injectable drugs. And if you look into studies, you see A1C, which is the key indicator for metabolic quality of metabolic control, comes down. And then if you look what is really going on in daily life, in real world, you see that this A1C in real world is far above what you can reach in a controlled setting like a clinical study. Why? Because in a clinical study, patient has to come frequently to the investigator. He gets more support and all that things. So it's easy to bring A1C down. But what I just said, being alone at home without any feedback, that makes it complicated to follow it. If he has a simple tool, let's see, or ranges, and this shows him what is going on, he may simply by doing this improve his metabolic control. One of the things we always can see is that, again, you have great drugs, but in daily life, efficacy is not as good as you see in clinical studies, and everything which helps a patient to manage the disease in daily life, especially by feedback, not only giving the glucose value, but for example, also give some advice. Let's say the device is combined with an app, with an algorithm, simply saying, hey, you are always high after breakfast. Have you thought about eating something different at breakfast, or eat less, or whatever? Exercise a little bit. All these things which are so easy to be done in most cases, but again, patient is not does not get any feedback. I think that really would improve the treatment, the overall outcome with the treatments we have available today.
Okay, that's very interesting because I mean there's a growing excitement around the GPL-1 therapies, and I can see it supporting and monitoring personalization of these sort of metabolic drugs. You've hinted at things like diabetic ketoacidosis and sepsis and other applications. Can you walk through how the single breath test could play a role in such different conditions and how that would be important?
Yep. So what we see from literature is that there are VOCs who are closely linked to sepsis, for example. And what we can imagine to do is to do a risk stratification of the sepsis, for example, in a hospital setting or ER setting, where somebody comes into the hospital, simply blows in our device, and we are not saying you have a sepsis, right? But we're saying you're good to go, or you simply stay or sit in the emergency care for whatever reason you came, or we put someone aside if the device tells with a red flag, for example, that that is needed. And then we take this person aside and earlier diagnosis or diagnostics will be done to this patient. So there are plenty of this kind of use cases which we see, or even putting our device in public, right, could be quite interesting also for diabetes. So there are plenty of use cases where we see our solution can bring some health benefits.
What is something that you're passionate about and really want to bring to people's attention?
So, I mean, what we are passionate about is really the idea that there are plenty of use cases and settings in which breath analysis could be used. And we see that the countries are so different, right? So what we see works in US not necessarily works in Africa, right? Or might not work in India, Indonesia, Philippines, which are, by the way, huge markets for not only for diabetes, but for other diseases, right? And we see that the landscape is so different. So I'm still dreaming that we will have a consumer device, right, which we bring to certain countries. But why not bringing our device in countries like India, where accessibility is a huge topic in public, and people simply go to a central place and blow into our device to make whatever health parameter it is much easier accessible to these people. Or imagine you do the same in Africa, where even people with type 1 diabetes sometimes have only access to one glucose reading per quarter if they see a doctor. So imagine you bring our device in a community, you put it in a central place, and we make really health parameters more accessible for the different people living in this community. So I think there are plenty of use cases, and that is really something that excites us.
Yeah, and to add on what Ben said, you mentioned already India, Ben. In India, things like syringes or things which you prick into your finger, they are really stigmatizing. I have learned that in exchange with colleagues working clinically in India, and they said, if you in Europe have a nice insulin pen and the patient is doing MDI, in India he will not do it. He will not show it. He will keep it secret. If the patient is pricking his finger to measure glucose, all good, all fine in Europe, but in India, he will not do it. He will simply neither measure nor inject. And so something like Lassie could also help here. And that also is something where I think, which is a very important alternative and could bring a lot of benefit to the respective patients.
So it's not just a snapshot of glucose, it's a window into a metabolic rhythm, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, it's fantastic, I think. I think it's amazing. A drop of blood is invasive, a breath is conversation. How do you think you're best going to engage with payers in, say, Germany, for example, or France?
We have started engaging already in some of the named countries at an early stage, and that's quite important for us to better learn how we can position ourselves together with the payers because it's a new methodology. It's an innovation. I mean, if you think of glucose, there is reimbursement today, but I think what we can offer is quite different and quite unique, which will go beyond what exists today. So we are trying to involve the payers as early as we can in our conversation to define the right route and pathway and prepare ourselves for a successful launch.
Yeah, and for example, in countries like Germany, where I have been working as physician, so I know a little bit about reimbursement situation there. You have disease management programs for people with type 1 and with type 2 diabetes. And if we could show that using LASI together with an app, with a feedback system, with daily support system, improves metabolic control by bringing A1C down, even in a developed country like Germany, the number of people with diabetes who have an A1C on target is very limited. So if we could, by evidence, clinical studies show that if a patient is using LASI, if the patient gets feedback from the app, if this is even built into the training program, which is included in all these disease management programs, I think the payers would be very interested. And as Ben said, we have started discussing with them how they see it, what opportunities they see, and so on and so on. And the last comment here, CGM is something which is already swapping, so to say, more and more into the type 2 arena, which comes with cost. And by the way, also, again, my clinician's perspective, not every patient with diabetes is even willing to use this system as a kind of help to improve his management. So if there comes something which is easy and quick and has demonstrated in studies that it helps, I think, I would not say payers will love us, but I would say it brings really a benefit, and that would be a way really to go.
Okay, so do you see breath composition becoming a new kind of vital sign?
Could be, of course, and vital is what is the most important in what you just mentioned. If the performance of the respective device is good enough, then absolutely. Imagine you have a small infant, and every pediatrician says that it is really a nightmare to take blood from a little kid.
Yes.
If this could be taken by breath, great. And so that also would be something which could be very helpful and very good. Of course, what I just said, then you have to prove that what you are measuring has a performance which is satisfying the needs of the physician. I mean, let's say with diabetes, if I want to decide whether I have to or decrease my insulin or the insulin dose of the patient, of course, the device, let's say, has to be as accurate as standard blood glucose meter is. And if this is proven, fine, then one could use it. And the same is true for other values, which also could be measured by VOC profiles. So if the performance is good enough, then I would say no clinician would say, I do not use it or I do not want to use it.
Absolutely. Okay, so if someone blew into the BOYDSense every morning for a year, what would their breath say about them? Could you one day not just spot glucose trends, but signatures of sleep disorders and other forms of resilience or disease?
I mean, we see more and more studies, right, in that space. So if you look into what is published today, what kind of literature related to breath, we have seen a significant increase over the past years. There are many universities working on breath analysis as we speak, and also some other companies. And they're looking really in a broad spectrum of different diseases. Sleep is one. There are companies or one company especially who's very specialized in oncology and breath analysis, which is not our field at all.
No.
And you need to have a different technology. I think that's the other component. You need to have different sensor technology. You need to ask yourself also, is that something which you want to make accessible to patients, right? And how much? Because I think everybody agrees that measuring whatever oncology parameter it is nothing we want to do at home, right? We want to have guidance or do it in front with a healthcare professional to put the right context behind the outcome, whatever the reading looks like. But there's a lot of really opportunity to go into multiple disease areas.
Are there different physicians, pharmaceutical companies? What is it you're trying to reach?
I mean, at the end, I mean, as we are still under development, right? You know, we're looking for money and we're raising money as we speak. So investors is one important group. Nevertheless, it's important for us that the different stakeholders in the healthcare industry becomes aware of the potential of breath analysis, and that is something which they should look at also to be integrated into their portfolio, right? If I talk about pharma or medtech companies, because we could be a companion to a drug, we could be a player in the digital space, right? To combine our readings with different applications. We could be of interest for service providers. It's important for us that we educate also reimbursers and payers about our technology and what we do, because there is, especially these days with ChatGPT, sometimes some limitations or mystics where people simply enter some words and they are not always necessarily true, right? So it's important that we talk about what we do and how we try to get a good performance and what kind of clinical trials and science we put behind.
Okay, so I think one of the last questions is, how big is the opportunity here, not just in diabetes, but across the wider metabolic health space?
Yeah, so that is really what excited me to join BOYDSense, right? For me, there is a huge potential in going beyond diabetes, giving this breath print for multiple metabolic diseases, chronic conditions, really to risk stratify, detect, and monitor the different diseases. And yeah, that's why I joined BOYDSense, actually, because I fully believe into the potential and make it broadly accessible across the globe.
Well, thank you very much for both of you, for your efforts today. And I'm excited by the technology, and I think I see it in use in clinical settings and in the community settings. And I wish you both the very best of luck, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks.
Thank
for
you very
giving
much.
us this opportunity, and yeah, thank you, Stephen.